Train Coomber Radio, episode 78. Damn! I'm excited about this show. It is another transatlantic show. I'm a massive fan of this guy's work. We've probably had one of the most amounts of buzz online before a show's gone out when it hasn't been recorded yet. I've been getting a lot of tweets and stuff saying, when is this infamous man on? Big fan of his work. Think he's brought some decent information to the fitness industry, you know, definitely along the lines of like intermittent fasting when Martin Burkham started to pop up, and you know, it's basically made people think about their kind of diet and the way they time it. Anyway, let's cut to the chase. On the other end of this call, I have Mr. John Kiefer.
Hey, Ben. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the great introduction. Appreciate that.
You're welcome. Hopefully one day I'll get an intro like that, but who knows? I suppose I'll probably have to do something decent, but we'll see. Mate, John, for people that don't know your work, might not be familiar with what you've done, you know, who is John Kiefer? What do you do, man?
Well, that's kind of a broad question. I guess what I'm known for right now is, you know, diet stuff, both in the health-related space, healthcare, the longevity, and then also, obviously, the performance world, which it's kind of weird to straddle both, but, you know, that just kind of happened because I've got two programs, both of which really focus on timing carbohydrates appropriately for whatever your goal. If your goal is fat loss, if it's health, or if it's just better performance.
Sure. Okay, cool. So for me, I'm well aware of both your programs. I've taught content around them in my seminars because it's very popular in the UK. Some of the thought processes that you've brought to the fitness industry. So being kind of an educator within the UK fitness industry is something that's regularly discussed alongside, you know, other carb cycling theories, intermittent fasting, and various other manipulations of macronutrients and calories. And ever since you brought out carb backloading, you know, I've played around with it a lot on myself. It fits my lifestyle. It kind of feels like how my body wants to work. I don't really like carbs early on in the day. I don't function well on them. Fat seems to be like a good fuel for me. I train in the PM, so the refeed just naturally falls in that window. For people that aren't aware of carb backloading, what is it in a nutshell? Drop me your elevator pitch.
In a nutshell, it's really simple. You eat high fat and protein the first half of the day, and that being until, you know, say 3 or 4 p.m., 5 p.m., and then at night you eat carbohydrates. And if you want to really accelerate the results of that diet, then you want to try to train in what I call the sweet spot, which is, you know, between 3 and 5 p.m. Start your training somewhere in there.
Shit, I'm going to train at 6:30 tonight. How's that going to pan out?
It's going to work fine. Really, you know, everybody makes this thing so complex, and it's really, really simple. And it's just eat your carbohydrates at night. And before that, eat a lot of fat and protein. I mean, it's really that simple. And, you know, the hard part is just timing it with yourself and figuring out how it works with your body.
Okay, so let's get down to some nuts and bolts. I'm a geek. There's going to be loads of geeks listening to this podcast, you know, especially a lot of the UK's personal trainers and just general fitness nuts. So we've got this PM feeding window where essentially we're refeeding, and you're talking about this optimal time of training. There's obviously rules to be followed, which really you've outlined, and it's very simple, and it's probably other people that blur the lines and screw up your interpretation of it, which is where the questions come in. I understand the theory. It's very kind of basic. For other people listening, and for me really, what are we harnessing in terms of physiological changes in adaptation with using this, rather than just saying, well, I'm going to track my calories and macronutrients and optimize it for body composition?
Wow. There are a ton of biological advantages to doing this. You know, the first, let's focus on fat loss first. You know, first thing in the morning, And really, most of the day, your body's primed not just to burn body fat, or not just to burn fat. We're always burning fat. That's not a big deal, and that's easy to accomplish. What's really key is when you wake up, your body is primed to mobilize body fat. And what that means is we're in this great state to where fat cells are very happy and very comfortable releasing the stored triglycerides for energy for the day. We don't want to screw that up. Insulin screws that up. High insulin levels, high blood sugar, that screws that up. So we want to avoid that. And that's really easy. Just don't eat carbohydrates. And then also, we have this great advantage. If you don't eat carbohydrates during the day and eat them at night, they've also found that increases leptin levels. It gives you a high leptin level throughout the day. So again, that's telling your fat cells and your entire body that you're in energy excess, which makes your body more apt to get rid of body fat. On top of that, with the elevated leptin levels, we also have higher metabolism. The body gets this signal that, again, we're in an energy surplus, so that we can, again, release more body fat. And ghrelin actually decreases all day and only spikes at night when you're going to eat the carbohydrates anyway. So ghrelin is our main hunger hormone that also releases growth hormone. So you get a spike at night, you eat your carbohydrates, and you get a release of growth hormone like you should in the evening. And also on top of that, adiponectin will go up continuously throughout the entire day. So the higher your adiponectin levels, the lower your body fat. There's an inverse correlation there. So what happens is all your hormones are shifting to tell your body you're in an energy surplus so that you can be leaner. This is very important for health, diabetes, fat loss, you name it. These are some of the most beneficial hormonal changes you can have. And then on top of that, at the cellular level, we're allowing fat cells to be more sensitive to a lot of stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, and also our muscle tissue. And the reason that's important is if you're going to train. So most people think of training as, okay, I need to fuel myself for the workout. I'm going to have some carbs before the workout. That's actually the worst thing you can do. Your body has a ton of energy stored intramuscularly. Glycogen stores, which we're aware of, intramuscular glycogen stores can only be used to fuel the muscle they're in. We also have intramuscular triglycerides stores. If you're not eating carbohydrates, what happens is your muscles are very sensitive to adrenaline, and adrenaline sensitivity is necessary, absolutely necessary, to mobilize intramuscular glycogen stores. So you will actually be stronger and perform better and have greater endurance if you don't eat carbohydrates before training. And then the real benefit to the carb backloading is then you're only eating carbohydrates at a time when you can refill the muscle tissue and try to minimize your fat cells absorbing glucose so that they can store triglycerides. So there's a lot of components. There's a lot of physiological things going on. There's performance. There's health. And it all, really just comes together in this simple package.
Okay. You mentioned adiponectin. I think in the fitness industry we talk a lot about various hormones, especially the hunger hormones. I think adiponectin is something that we don't really talk about. Can you just expand a little bit and just highlight why it might be a little bit more important in the realm of body composition?
Really, it's it's hard to say its exact function, but we know a lot of correlations. So whenever adiponectin is elevated, then we see better use of blood sugar when it's available. We see better mobilization of body fat, and we see higher metabolism, primarily through upregulation of uncoupling proteins. So having high levels of adiponectin, especially in kind of this continuous state that you get through the day, it's very important and very functional for the athlete and for a general person as well. It essentially tells the body don't store body fat. It's okay to use body fat for energy instead of storing it. It's basically the correlation that adiponectin tells us.
Okay. Because obviously there's a certain amount of research that supports carb backloading, and there's a certain amount of research that we kind of just say, look, if we track our calories and we track our macronutrients and this all falls into line, then you're going to enhance body composition, you're going to lose weight or gain weight depending on what your goals are. And for me, a lot of the theory, from what I can understand with carbohydrate backloading, is that we're kind of connecting dots between all the physiological systems within the body. So, there's been plenty of argument in the fitness industry around CBL and kind of how much of it we could claim as being proven or not proven. And I think, for me, there's a huge amount in any system that we need to try from an anecdotal perspective, because whenever we look at something from the outside looking in, we need to connect all the dots and say, well, this makes sense logically when we look at these systems via hormonal pathways, various different cellular pathways, and we kind of need to roll with it for a period of time and see how much kind of fact lies within what we're trying to say. I know I'm kind of fluffing around the bush a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is, do you think that's the case in how much you've put together in terms of carb backloading, in terms of the science and what areas of it is supported, both from a direct and an indirect correlative kind of angle?
Yeah, what you're actually describing perfectly is the scientific method, and in this case, it's the scientific method done correctly. So, for example, we know a lot of facts. We know what happens at the cellular level under a lot of situations. We know what happens at the systemic level through the endocrine system in a lot of situations. We know a lot of facts. So where you want to start if you're going to build any diet or any exercise program or any health program, you want to start at these physiological knowns. We know these things. We know how they operate. So from there, you construct what you think is the best plan to utilize the things that we know. And then exactly what you said, you either can study that directly, which unfortunately I don't have the resources to do, or you can look and start to see what happens empirically, which is, this anecdotal stuff, watching people, seeing how they react, seeing the results they get, and seeing, is there something here? And at this point, there's literally tens and tens of thousands of people on this diet, and they're getting great results. So there is definitely something here that is worthy of looking at, and we've got a really, really strong physiological basis for it. What we're missing now is the in-between pieces, and there's only been a couple, 2 or 3 studies that have directly studied carb backloading. And that's when we'll start to finally elucidate how do you fine-tune this. And that's actually what I'm doing now. I'm collecting, I've got some really high-tech devices that are cool that monitor people's blood sugar levels continuously for a week. We're collecting ketone data. So, I am starting to try to collect some data to get some of this more scientific data rather than just looking at the empirical results. But what you describe is exactly the way science works and the way science should work. Start at first principles, construct your theory, and then start testing it. And that's what's going on in the world right now. It's just being tested.
Nice. Just on a side note, how are you testing glucose in the cells? I asked purely because literally this morning I was talking with a colleague of mine, and there's a new type of kind of calorie meter that people can wear on their wrist that constantly analyzes the glucose that are within the cell at any given time to track calories more closely. Is it anything to do with the same technology, or is this different?
This is different. I'm looking at blood sugar levels so that I can correlate with what's going on with their diet and timing. And that's a continuous glucose monitoring system where they literally inject this small probe. It's a really tiny needle, and they wear this probe for a week, and it transmits data to a device. Wow. So it's literally, second by second blood sugar levels. We can see spikes. We can see lulls. We can see all kinds of stuff with that.
Oh, awesome. Nice. So coming back to let's talk anecdotally, because I've talked a lot about I've done various blogs and videos of me talking about carb backloading and my personal kind of experience with it. And again, like we've talked about, we look at physiological principles and we play around with it on a personal level. And having done it myself, I find that if I follow your exact template, which I do quite a lot of days, I find that I can eat more in the PM window after training within my caloric allowance. So if I was to follow a normal macronutrient plan and eat carbs whenever I want, let's say I can eat 2,500 calories. For some reason, I can maintain my body composition and still lean gain at around 2,800, 2,900. I can seem to eat more. Why on earth is this, John?
It's really, it's all part of it is, the way you're thinking and the way you present it actually presents the problem before we know if there's a problem or not. And that problem is there seems to be this imbalance between calories in, calories out. What we have to look at is all this calories in, calories out, body composition, those things. It's a very, very simplistic and granular, or it's very simplistic and not granular enough to really tell us what's going on inside the body. Basically, calories in, calories out, as we know it, and the equations that we use are all based on a certain context, and that's a carbohydrate-based diet. So if you have a carbohydrate-based diet, these equations are going to do a pretty good job of just telling you weight change, and that's it. When you start really trying to optimize your food intake with how the body works, you start to change your metabolism. You start to change what you're telling your body to do. So on a carb-based diet, you're basically telling your body all the time, hey, we got to try to store energy. And it does that. It does that in body fat, and it does that in intramuscular glycogen, liver glycogen. Carb backloading isn't telling your body that. Carb backloading is telling your body, okay, we are going to use preferred energy sources all day. So let's get a lot of access to that body fat. Let's use those high energy sources that we've got stored everywhere. And then at night, you're saying, okay, the stuff that did all the work, let's get it to grow and store these calories in the appropriate places for the next day's work. You're literally telling your body something different. And when you do, it's going to act differently. And one of the things it's going to do is then mobilize body fat for energy. It's going to use the energy, the food you eat, to replenish your muscle glycogen so you can perform better the next day. And it's going to raise your metabolism, because you're playing with some of these hormonal tricks. So it is. So, really it's all a matter of context. We're just really trying to make the body far more inefficient in storing body fat and inefficient with energy usage. And by inefficient, I mean you're burning more energy than you normally would. And then we're trying to make the anabolic processes that we want, like muscle growth, more efficient. So that's what's going on here. It's just a totally different context. And I think that's what confuses a lot of people is everybody, all the majority of data that we have, all of these equations for calories in, calories out, they're all based on a very specific context. And that context is not applicable for a lot of people.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, no, it does. It does. And I, if I sit down with a client, I do it myself, whoever it is, when you're trying to calculate this calorie process, there's so much margin for error that, like you say, I think the equations that we have at our disposal are accurate to a degree, but there's so much where you have to feel your way through it and just keep playing around with it. And that's why I say to people, look, you might count your calories and macronutrients, but you've still got to be flexible. You've still got to kind of listen to the body a little bit. You've kind of got to just go with it because I don't think it's ever going to be an exact science. I think some things are going to come a lot closer in the future, especially with its availability to the mainstream, with actually accurately calculating calories. if you were to calculate calories in someone's diet right now, what are the methods that you're using with clients and possibly yourself to be as accurate as possible?
I do start with the equations we have because it is a baseline, and then I'll look at it. It really varies on their goal. If their goal is fat loss, then I'm probably I'm not going to keep them too far off of those equations, only because they're a really good starting point. For somebody with performance-wise, I'm going to add maybe 20% to that, and then go from there. It's really, I don't want to say crapshoot, but at the same time, it kind of is. I mean, everybody, like you said, is very different, and there's a large window. And the big problem we have is, again, if they weren't on one of these type of performance diets, and I don't mean just physical performance, but a diet made to make your body perform a certain way, I don't have a lot of context for what's the best calorie load for them. So you just kind of have to figure it out, which usually takes, a month or two to really nail it. But within a month, you can get pretty close, just kind of playing with that, start at that baseline and then go from there.
Nice. Okay. Moving the question on slightly, the last time I read your book, you said that CBL can fit nicely into kind of intermittent fasting or eating breakfast later. Now, when we talk about optimal body composition and optimal muscle growth, we kind of know the importance of muscle protein synthesis and potentially stimulating it as often as we can within the parameters of how often we can actually physically stimulate it or physiologically. Is your opinion still that we can gain maximal amounts of muscle while maybe being on an extended fast in the morning, so basically eating breakfast later?
In my opinion, if you want maximum muscle stimulation, you should be eating breakfast. You should not be eating any carbohydrates whatsoever. It should be pretty high fat and protein. And my context with breakfast is it's really the least important meal of the day. So if your real goal is to just get rid of body fat, you don't really need to worry about breakfast so much. If your goal is to increase muscle mass, then you need to consider breakfast. It's another meal of the day. I don't want to say breaking the fast, but you're providing more fuel basically for those processes to build more muscle. So, that's why I've always had this. I've not been a fan of intermittent fasting because it really takes away a lot of it's easy. Obviously you don't eat all day and then you eat at night. That makes it really easy to control your calories, but it's not going to be ideal for body composition. You're going to be people who are successful with that, if you notice, are much, much smaller. They carry much less muscle mass. And there's a reason for that. And, most of the day, their body's just at best in an anti-catabolic state instead of an anabolic state for muscle tissue.
Sure. I definitely think as I've become, I definitely played around with intermittent fasting a lot more years ago, as we all do. We all try these systems and see what their value is. And, now when I try and fast for any decent length of time, especially if I'm training high, I just feel weaker, feel smaller, and just don't really function well on it. I feel my body wants a fuel source to operate, optimally, so to speak. Right, let's fit a little bit more specificity around this framework. We can't sit here and, in my mind, claim that CBL can be a perfect diet template for everyone because I definitely think there's different types of people that work on different fuel sources. I think especially when we look at some female populations, where do you see CBL working with certain populations? Where does it fit perfectly with people?
The perfect fit, is the male who's carrying a good, I'm going to say extra 30 to 40 pounds of muscle mass. They train on a regular basis 3 or more times a week. That's kind of the ideal fit for CBL. I mean, that's pretty much easy out of the box. CBL is going to work. As you start moving towards people who are let's just, you brought up females, women. There's a lot of complications there, and one of the major ones they have is their stress levels. Females in general have higher stress responses, and they have more chronic stress responses in our current society. Mm-hmm. And especially when they train, they don't understand when they train, and they train what might even be equivalent to a male counterpart. They're actually overstressing their body, and one thing that does to them is it makes their muscles less sensitive to adrenaline and the other stress hormones. So you get this kind of, I always called it adrenaline diabetes, is what I originally termed it. You start to get this adrenaline resistance, essentially. And for women, that really hurts the effectiveness of CBL, because if your muscles aren't sensitive to adrenaline, like I said earlier, they cannot burn off or access that intramuscular glycogen stores, which means those carbohydrates that they eat at night don't have any place to go except for the liver or potentially fat cells. So they're in that population. We have to be very careful to make sure that their training is on point and that it's, almost dead on. I mean, everybody who works for me for stage prep, especially females, are always, they're just like, why am I doing so little work? Why is my training volume so low? I'm like, well, because we're just trying to get you to burn body fat. I have no other goal right now other than to keep your stress levels at the perfect place so that we can drain off your body fat and drain off your glycogen stores. And, they always come in on point, and they're always amazed that, that little amount of volume was all that they needed. And I think that's, for women, that's really the hard part with CBL, is getting them to understand that their training could really be the limiting factor for carb backloading. And with that in mind, that's why usually for carb backloading, I tell women at most you should be eating carbs 2 nights a week until you get all of that completely tuned.
I totally agree. Any competitor that I've trained, coming up to competition, they've been on 4, maybe 5 hours a week, and that's it. Mm-hmm. That's it. Like, I haven't found a female that's been able to cope effectively. And when I say effectively, they're sleeping brilliantly, their sex drive is still high, their skin, hair, and nails is good, their energy is good all throughout the day. As soon as their training volume goes over that, for me, everything just goes downhill slowly, and then the road to recovery post-comp is just even longer.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And, what's really bad there, and this is in the States, this happens a lot, that's when the drugs really start to come into play, because they're trying to use the drugs to compensate for the body fighting against this process. And, the drugs are more powerful. They're mimicking what the body would want to do naturally, but its stress response is so high, it just can't. So, it's this mismatch of understanding what's going on with this energy, calories in, calories out paradigm, using carbohydrates. And then those drugs come into play, and that really that really screws up a lot of people, unfortunately.
So coming back to females and stress, I personally find that females do better on a carb-rich diet in general. So this stress connection, can we maybe draw some kind of sense that because females' cortisol levels could be chronically high for longer periods of time, that having higher blood levels of glucose during the day is more beneficial because of the higher glucose levels, because they're constantly trying to break down tissues for energy?
So here's where we have a divergence of theory and practice. In theory, you'd want to keep their blood glucose levels lower. Cortisol is this great hormone if insulin's not around and blood sugar is relatively low, because cortisol, really its job is to try to mobilize internal energy stores for survival. And if you're not providing glucose, then cortisol is really good at helping to mobilize body fat. It's going to trigger the release of glucagon, which, again, if blood sugar levels are low, then glucagon's main function is to mobilize glycogen stores out of the liver. So we will often see in those high stress states, we'll see higher blood glucose levels. That's not abnormal. But what we don't want to do is feed that paradigm. From a physiological standpoint, what we want to do is let the body use those internal stores as effectively as possible. So, in my experience, I still try to limit carbohydrates as much as possible. Usually get the best results. But that being said, I have worked with women who have a much higher tolerance to carbohydrates, and it could possibly lower their stress levels just because they don't feel as limited. So again, that's person by person, but at a physiological level, the target there for somebody who's chronically stressed really is to, my first plan of attack is to limit carbohydrates.
Interesting. Cool. Well, I'll put a caveat in there for people listening. You've still got to play around with this stuff because there's so many people I see in the fitness industry chronically low calorie diets and chronically low carbohydrate diets, and I see them in seminars staring back at me through gaunt eyes, and I'm like, look, just go and have an apple with your breakfast. Jesus, like.
Well, so what you're saying though, actually, I would agree with. If you're coming off of one of these really calorically deprivated diets, then yeah, you're right. Introducing carbohydrates, particularly for, a week or so, introducing those back into the diet, even at breakfast in that case, will help them to reorient faster. And they'll see all of a sudden in that week, and you've probably seen this in the people you've worked with, like for that week, if you can just get them to eat some carbohydrates, like all of a sudden they look and feel better and they start leaning out some. Mm. So in that case, what you're doing is you're resetting a lot of hormonal levels besides cortisol. They're going to help them get back on track and help them to possibly lose some body fat. So, you're dead on the mark. You've got to experiment with this stuff, and you've got to look at what you're doing and saying, okay, is this really accomplishing what I want? And your main focus shouldn't just be, okay, I'm lean all the time. It should be, am I lean all the time? Do I feel good? And if I go off the reservation, if I screw up, if I do something, does it really affect me that much? And that's a real key principle with carb backloading and carb night, is that if you screw up, it really doesn't do much. You could screw up for an entire day and it doesn't have a major impact. And that's one of the really important things we should look at for health and performance, is that you have this robust system. And by robust, I mean you can hit it with a hammer every once in a while and it just settles right back down to normal. Whereas if you're in these really calorie deprivated states or you're overtraining, if you hit the system with a hammer, man, you break. Mm. So, I think that's an important thing to look at in your diet. Is your diet accomplishing that? Is your diet allowing you to be lean, to perform well, and is it making you robust? And again, by that I mean you can screw up every once in a while and it doesn't make a difference.
Nice. I think this comes down to how people's bodies function as a whole, because I think, especially before a lot of people get into fitness and become aware of their body, they've done an awful good job of screwing up their body and their physiology as it is. So the actual road to functioning optimally is actually way longer than they think, and obviously way longer than they want. And I think for me to get a real handle on my health and body composition, I think it took a good 5 or 6 years, if I'm honest, to kind of really start to understand it.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I mean, to be honest, it's still an ongoing process for me. I mean, I understand it really well, but sometimes things happen that I can't explain. And, I'm going on, I started when I was 15 and I'm 39 now. So that's a really long window of just paying attention and understanding my body. And admittedly, it's super easy now compared to what it used to be. But, I still pay attention and I still see things that are a little strange every once in a while.
No, me too. Me too. We're always learning, and it's a beautiful journey.
Yeah.
So let's move on. If we look around on carb backloading on the internet, there's an awful lot of people that have kind of, in my eyes, misconstrued a lot of your thought processes with how you might refeed in this window. And you can go online and there's loads of examples of people throwing junk down their face, and that carb backloading is all about eating junk food and being lean and stuff. And while I get how this happens, to the outsider looking in, this seems like a very dysfunctional diet paradigm to me. Now, to me, the reason how this all came about is you showed people how they could potentially be flexible with their diet with fast-acting carbohydrates or sugary foods. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you the guy that's saying it's cool to eat a cherry turnover every day? Or are we saying, look, the majority of the time we should be eating great, wholesome, natural foods, but this is where we can be flexible with our nutrition?
I'm slanted towards the, you should be eating whole foods, better choices. But, I would say I'm more flexible than, just once in a while or, a few times a week. If you're eating junk, you should be able to handle it pretty well. If you can't, then, that just means you're probably eating too many carbohydrates. But yeah, in general, it fits in with this paradigm of you want to be robust, and you should be able to eat those things every once in a while. You should be able to have the cherry turnovers. Now, would I eat 4 cherry turnovers every night? Like you said, no, that wasn't what I was trying to say. It's that you can use these foods in an appropriate way at an appropriate time. So if you've been carb backloading and you feel like you're not getting enough carbohydrates, well, eat a pizza one night. That seems like junk food, but you just made up for all your carbohydrate deficit for the week, and you're probably going to wake up leaner. But again, that presupposes that your diet was pretty good before that.
Sure. No, I'm glad we've extracted that, because there was an awful lot of questions and comments on that when I asked, and I just thought, Jesus, we've got to set the record straight on this bad boy.
Yeah, I even have a chapter in the book called "Don't Be a Fat Kid." Don't use carb backloading as an excuse to stuff yourself with junk every night. That's not what it is. And just like you said, you've got a lot of flexibility with this diet that you can use, but that doesn't mean that you can stuff yourself with junk food 24/7.
Is that new chapter in CBL 2.0?
Yeah, that chapter will be in carb backloading 2.0, but it'll be greatly expanded so that people can stop making this diet look foolish, I guess, is what's happening out there. Kind of bring it back under the paradigm of, flexibility and, getting to enjoy junk every once in a while instead of all the time.
Brilliant. A little reality check. I like that. Well, yeah. I'll look forward to reading that, because I loved your first book. So,
thanks.
So I put a shout out on Facebook. I've got a couple of questions from other people. I've kind of been through the stuff that I wanted to ask. And this is interesting, actually, because this relates personally to me, this question. Ben Adkins says, despite the fact that I'm now sub 10% body fat, I was very overweight as a child, and I'm well aware that my body contains a large number of lipids or fat cells, or dead fat cells as I call it. Does this leave me open to more fat storage on a highly glycemic carb backloading protocol?
This one's interesting. So depending on how old you are and when you started to become lean, it takes about 10 years for fat cells to actually die. If they stay empty for 10 years, they're going to die, and you can start fixing some of that damage. So it's going to depend on how long ago it was that you were overweight. Because of the beneficial hormone responses that we get during the day, with leptin response, adiponectin response, ghrelin response, all these things, and lower insulin levels, you might be slightly more susceptible, but it's unlikely for a couple reasons. One, fat cells have become less insulin sensitive in the evening. Two, when you take carbohydrates out of the diet for a period of time, you are, again, slightly insulin insensitive at that first introduction mark, and it takes a few hours for that to come back online. So you've got this nice window at night where you, even if you previously were overweight, you will still be shielded from that susceptibility to get fat again.
Nice. Yeah, I was a fat kid, and ever since I was, 19, I've been lean. That's 8 years now. I definitely think it's easier to manage as I've got older, but I kind of know my carb tolerance based on my training volume. It kind of goes between 140 and 180 grams a day for the most part. And if I go way over that and I stay within what is looked at as my caloric load, I feel like I retain a lot of fluid the next day when I wake up. Yeah,
there'll be a lot of fluid retention. That's usually the complaint about what people see is that excess water storage.
Yeah, and that's annoying. That means I have to really get it spot on. I can't go for that extra serving.
Right.
This is a question I get asked all the time at my seminars when I talk about carb backloading, and for me, this thought process is very specific to me for a body type, and this is in personal experience. Dan Richard asks, how do you implement CBL whilst training early in the AM? And are there any rules that can or can't be broken due to the change in training time?
That one's, again, pretty simple. You eat your carbs at night. Even though you train in the morning, you've still got your endocrine signaling is very, very powerful. And those are the effects that are driving a lot of why CBL is effective. The GLUT4, just by resistance training at any time during the day, your muscle cells have higher concentration of GLUT4 and GLUT12. They mobilize more readily. So even if you're training in the morning, eating your carbs at night is going to give you preferential disposal of glucose into the muscle tissue. The only deviation for some athletes, and these are for longer workouts, if workouts run over an hour or more, sometimes I'll introduce a small amount of carbohydrates after the diet, but this is very individually based. Normally what I will do instead is introduce a protein shake with MCT oil or coconut oil, something like that. That's usually more effective. But otherwise, the rule is really the rule. Eat your carbohydrates at night. And the other possible caveat to that, if you're really looking at performance, is that you may need to eat those carbohydrates the night before your workout. So if you're not having a carb backload every night, you may want to time those more effectively to be the night before your training sessions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I would still put it in there at night. I find this works very well in people that seem to want to gravitate towards a fat-dominant diet. And I definitely think there's I'm a big fan of looking at body types and kind of the phenotype that attaches itself to that. And this kind of like endomorphic body type, for me, works really well still with just training in the morning and having your carbs at night.
Yeah, it's so funny because, I mean, it's really a simple principle. Just eat your carbohydrates at night. And it gets so over-analyzed and complexified. It's really interesting to me.
I bet it is the guy that thought about it. Okay, moving on. So Paul Burgess says, Is carbohydrate backloading really effective, as insulin sensitivity, he says, is best in the morning regardless of fat or muscle tissue sensitivity?
That's one of the principles we're actually depending on. And I want to make this clear, that's only in healthy individuals. Obese people actually are insulin resistant in the morning, and their insulin sensitivity goes up through the day. But in healthy people, we're actually depending on that process. We want to introduce carbohydrates at a time when insulin sensitivity is lower for fat cells and muscle tissue, because then you can preferentially get muscle tissue to absorb those carbohydrates. You're going to, if you keep insulin low through the day, your normal activities are going to help to, regardless of exercise, are going to help to drain intramuscular glycogen stores. So again, we have preferential disposal there. And I won't add any more to that.
Sure. No, I agree. Also, he says, what have you found out regarding resistant starch and the best sources to use? Is this something that you personally talk about quite a bit and like to use with clients?
I'm still not on the resistant starch bandwagon. I think it's, another just, distraction at the moment. It's kind of interesting. We've known about resistant starch for a really long time. It's not like it's something new. And what we're looking at is what is it doing, particularly in our intestinal tract, that could be the most beneficial. And there's other things you can take that are far more beneficial and in better concentration. So if somebody's using one of these diets, if you want to use resistant starch, that's fine. You can eat your potatoes or your green bananas at night. That's one way to get extra fiber. But what we also see is that you can use things like galacto-oligosaccharides and fructo-oligosaccharides, and you can introduce those at any time during the day and get actually higher benefits than you ever could from resistant starch. And even to the point of people who sometimes have a hard time getting their ketone levels elevated, if they introduce the correct types of fiber into their diet, they actually will see a little boost in ketone levels. So, resistant starch is nothing special. It happens to be a readily available fuel for your gut bacteria that's easy to find in potatoes and peas and bananas, and you can find it pretty easily. So, I'm not that jazzed about it, so I don't recommend it. If somebody's really concerned, then I go for a fiber supplement that I know will have definite biological effects.
Me too. I agree 100%. 100%. So this is something that I'm very much interested in your opinion. This is a question from me rather than someone else, because this is the one thing when I first read your book, I was like, I get what you're talking about with the physiology, but I just can't agree with you.
Okay.
And this was the point of caffeine post-workout. And we've talked a little bit on this podcast about people being in kind of optimal health, their physiology responding correctly. I get what mechanism you are working with caffeine. Is this something you still recommend, bearing in mind what most people's physiology, or how most people's physiology is working, and the kind of stressful effects of caffeine and adrenaline on the tissues?
I've backed off on caffeine quite a bit for a few reasons. I would use those protocols in the book only for very high performance athletes at very specific times. But in general, it seems that people do better with just a caffeine load in the morning and then not much caffeine thereafter. So I've really backed off the caffeine. I think you can use it in some very creative and powerful ways, but you need to be very careful with it. And I often find when people drop their caffeine loads, especially in the evening, they actually do much better, not only from a fat loss perspective, but also a performance perspective. Better increases in lean mass, better strength gains. So whatever the possible benefit there was there with replenishing glycogen stores seems to be outweighed by the negative potentials on the stress of the extra stress on the system. So like I said, I only use it now very specifically with certain athletes at certain times for very specific goals.
Awesome. Glad you said that. that was my thought process, in my opinion, and this is really interesting because I've done a lot of playing about with caffeine recently, and this is something that I've talked a lot about on this podcast because before Christmas I got my adrenal hormones tested, something I'd never done before actually, and I'm a very healthy guy. I have a very low stress life. I live in the countryside. I walk my dog. I work from home. It's very relaxed. I choose that life to live. And my stress hormones were through the roof. And I was like, Jesus, if mine are like this in the lifestyle that I have, what are other people's like?
Right.
So I haven't had caffeine since December. And man, I feel awesome.
Yeah.
The only caffeine that I have is transdermal caffeine, and that's it.
Oh, yeah, it's, I think we get way oversaturated, and it's kind of like, I'm sure I've advocated nicotine use, but I've advocated like very short term, and I'm starting to have the same attitude about caffeine. It should be like a very short term adjunct at very specific times. It shouldn't be something that we take large doses of on a regular basis. Even for myself, I've cut my caffeine loads down to literally a cup of coffee in the morning twice a week. And really, I don't get any other caffeine than that anymore. And like you said, I feel awesome. Like everything is better pretty much.
Nice. All right, then, John. Well, amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. I've been hounding you for ages to get on my show. And
yeah, sorry about that. I should have probably been on your show much, much earlier. But to make it up to you, if you want to do another one of these, because I feel like we probably could talk for another hour, just let me know, and I'll make sure I make time to get back on here.
Well, I think it would be wicked to let this show go out, let people, formulate their opinions, give it a bit of time, and we put a post out on social media and we say, do you know what? If people want to expand on this, we'll expand on it, and we'll put some posts out and ask some more questions and maybe open up discussion a bit more.
Yep,
I'm more than happy to
sounds
do
good.
That. Awesome. So, dude, people need to find you after this podcast if they don't already know about you. Where do you want to direct them to? What are the best sources of information to let people know?
Right now, everything is at my new site, which is body.io.
Yeah, what is with that? That is so... I kind of thought body... I was trying to think what it meant. What does it mean? Why body.io? It's really kind of odd, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like for input-output. My view of the body when I started all this is it's just this really complex, almost like computer. So if you give it the right input, you'll get the exact output you want. So, it's kind of perfect. So input-output for the body.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I've just logged on to it, and it's very clean. Oh, you've just recently been talking with Ben Greenfield.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah,
He's recently been on the show. Nice. Yeah. This is a great site.
Thanks.
Awesome.
It just went up like a week ago.
Yeah. Good. Well, people, you've heard it. Everything to find out. John Kiefer. It is body.io. I think you can all remember that. Hopefully. John, again, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll get another show up and running in the future.
Yeah, sounds great. Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, so I appreciate it.
You're wicked, dude. Right, to everyone listening, you know the drill. Be an awesome dude or dudette, and go and share this on Facebook. Go and share this on Twitter. Please, if you haven't done so already, be an amazing human being and leave a review on iTunes. It helps the show out no end. Keep helping this podcast reach, thousands of people and helping them with their nutrition and training. Oh, and before I forget, you lucky things, www.bencoomber.com has just been revamped, and oh my god, is it sexy! Loads of new stuff up there. I've got all the interviews I've ever done on like other people's shows and on people's YouTube channels and stuff. The blog's restarted as a culmination of different ramblings and rants and stuff. I've got all my recorded seminars going up. I've got a documentary that was filmed on me about all my kind of businesses and how I grew in the industry, what courses I did, like all sorts of stuff. I've also got a massive blog, which is a tab on the homepage of how I eat, move, and supplements. Everything I do is compiled in a blog. That is all at the website. There's loads of different stuff. Yeah, just go and check it out. I think there's some cool stuff that people are going to learn and some cool resources. So, until next time, ciao. Hey everyone, Ben Coomber Radio, episode 77. The old format is back in the house. I'm back with what I would describe as a co-host.